There are things you never see coming, not because you're foolish, but because you trust the wrong person for the right reasons. My son called me on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching the birds at the feeder my wife Margaret had hung on the oak tree 17 years ago. I still fill it every Sunday. Old habits don't die, they just become the way you keep someone alive. "Dad," my son said, and his voice had that particular warmth in it, the kind he used when he wanted something and didn't want me to know yet. "I've been thinking. You've been alone in that house for 2 years now. Patricia and I want to do something special for you. A real estate attorney friend of ours is putting together a family estate planning seminar, private. Very exclusive. And we thought it would be perfect for someone in your position." I asked him what position that was. He laughed. "A man with assets and no plan, Dad. We just want to make sure you're protected." I was 67 years old. I had spent 31 years as a civil engineer. I had built bridges, real ones, over real rivers. And I had the patience and the eye for detail that comes from a career where a miscalculation doesn't just cost money, it costs lives. I was not a man who made decisions without reading every line of every document. My son knew this, or he should have. But grief does something to a person. Not stupidity grief. After Margaret passed from a stroke 2 years prior, I had let certain things slide. Not my mind, not my discipline, but my suspicion. When you've lost the person who kept you honest with yourself, you sometimes let your children fill that space. And you forget briefly, dangerously, that children are not always who they were when they were young. I told my son I would think about it. He called again Thursday. Then Patricia, my daughter-in-law, sent flowers to the house with a card that said, "We just love you and want to make sure you're taken care of." I had always found Patricia's handwriting too neat. The kind of neat that takes effort to look effortless. I agreed to go on a Saturday. My son picked me up at 10 in the morning. The seminar was being held at the Lakeside Conference Center, a place I'd driven past many times on Route 9, one of those converted Victorian properties that now hosted weddings and corporate retreats. My son chatted the entire drive about property tax strategies and the importance of trusts, things he had clearly been rehearsing. Patricia sat in the back seat and added small affirmations at precise intervals. I noticed she never asked me a single question about how I was feeling. She only confirmed things my son said. The conference center was elegant. A woman at the front desk smiled and handed me a name badge. My son guided me by the shoulder firmly, like you guide someone who might wander toward a registration table where a young man in a gray suit was arranging papers into folders. That was when I noticed the other man. He was standing near the window at the far end of the room, separate from the small clusters of other attendees. He was perhaps 40, wearing a lanyard that said Notary Public. He had a briefcase open on a side table and was reviewing documents with the focused expression of someone who was not there to learn anything, he was there to finalize something. I had been to enough closings, enough contract signings in my career to recognize what a notary looked like when he was waiting for a specific person. He was waiting, and the specific person, I understood with a cold clarity that moved through me like water finding its level, was me. I excused myself to use the restroom. I did not go to the restroom. Instead, I walked toward the windows on the opposite side of the room, toward the corridor that led to the building's side exit. A young woman was coming out of a supply closet carrying a stack of programs for the event. She nearly walked into me. She apologized, and then she stopped and looked at me with an expression I hadn't expected: concern, quiet and deliberate, the way a person looks when they've been watching something unfold and have been waiting to say something to someone. "Sir," she said very quietly, "are you here with the Callaway Group?" I looked at her. "My son's name is Callaway." "Yes." She glanced past me toward the registration table. Then she said, even more quietly, "Please don't sign anything today. Not here." She paused. "I overheard them on the phone this morning when I was setting up. I don't think this event is what they told you it was." Then she walked away toward the main hall, and I stood in that corridor for 10 seconds that felt like a full minute, doing what engineers do when the ground shifts. I reassessed every assumption I had made. I texted my son, stepped out for some air. "Give me a few minutes." Then I walked out the side door, called a car service from my phone, and went home. On the drive back, I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was the particular feeling of a man who has just realized He was standing very close to an edge and didn't know it. The edge was still there. I was no longer near it, but I needed to understand exactly what it was. Margaret had been meticulous. This was one of the things I had loved most about her, and occasionally found exhausting in the way you find beloved things exhausting. She kept files on everything: insurance policies, investment statements, correspondence, receipts for appliances. After she died, I had moved her filing cabinet into the study and left it largely untouched. The way you leave certain rooms. It felt like going through her pockets. I wasn't ready. I was ready now. I sat down on the floor of the study. The chair felt too formal for what I was doing, and I started from the top drawer. The first two drawers were what I expected: household records, medical history. A folder for each of our 3 children, with their birth certificates, school records, childhood drawings she'd saved that made my chest tighten in a way I had to breathe through. The third drawer was where things became complicated. There was a folder labeled simply with my son's name and a date 14 months ago, 3 months before Margaret died. Inside were printed emails. Margaret had printed emails and kept them in a physical folder, which told me she had considered them important enough to preserve in a way that didn't depend on passwords or devices. The emails were between my son and a man named Gerald Whitmore, described in the signature line as a specialist in estate restructuring. The language was professional and indirect in the way that language becomes when the people writing it know what they're doing is not quite right. Phrases like repositioning of legacy assets and guardian authority transfer and cognitive capacity documentation appeared with a frequency that told me they were not accidental. My son was attempting to have me declared incompetent. Not violently, not cruelly bureaucratically. He had been building a paper case for guardianship. The seminar today would have involved documents the notary would have witnessed my signature on forms that, once filed, would begin the legal process of transferring management of my estate to my son. Patricia would likely be named co-guardian. They would have framed it as care. They would have used words like protection and peace of mind and what Mom would have wanted. There was one more document in the folder. It was a letter, handwritten, addressed to me. In Margaret's handwriting: "Robert, if you're reading this, something has happened and I wasn't able to tell you in person. I found these emails by accident. I was using Daniel's laptop at Thanksgiving to look up a recipe, and his email was open. I printed what I saw because I didn't know what to do with it yet. I was going to talk to you after the holidays. I was going to talk to you after a lot of things. I don't know what he's planning or when, but I know our son and I know he loves you, in the way that some people love mostly, when it's convenient. Don't let him make decisions for you. You are the sharpest person I have ever known. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I love you. Keep feeding the birds." I sat on the floor of that study for a long time. Margaret had known. She had seen it coming the way she saw most things coming, quietly, without alarm, with the practical foresight of a woman who had spent 40 years anticipating what the people she loved might need before they needed it. She had left me a warning inside a filing cabinet, trusting that I would find it when I needed it. She had known I would eventually open that drawer. I thought about the birds at the feeder outside. I thought about the fact that she had written that letter while she was sick, while she was managing her own mortality, and she had still found time to protect me. I did not cry. Not then. There would be time for that. First, there were things to do. I called Martin Okafor on Monday morning. Martin was a colleague from my professional years, now retired, whose son-in-law was an estate attorney with a reputation for being meticulous and unimpressed by complicated family situations. I told Martin I needed an appointment that week. He didn't ask many questions. He had known me long enough to understand that when I said I needed something that week, I meant it. Martin's son-in-law, whose name was James, met me on Wednesday. I brought the folder from Margaret's filing cabinet, including her letter. James read everything without expression, which I appreciated. I did not need sympathy at that moment. I needed competence. He told me the attempted guardianship filing had not yet been submitted to any court, which meant we were ahead of it. He told me the documents my son had likely planned to have me sign at the conference center would have been a preliminary consent form, not legally binding on their own, but useful as evidence in a cognitive capacity hearing. The fact that I had not signed them was significant. He also told me that Margaret's printed emails, combined with her handwritten letter, established a documented record of premeditation that would be difficult for my son to argue around. We spent 2 hours in that office. When I left, I had a revised estate plan, a power of attorney assigned to my nephew, a man whose integrity I trusted absolutely, and a letter drafted by James to be sent to my son, informing him that I was aware of the guardianship consultation with Gerald Whitmore, that I had retained legal counsel, and that any further proceedings in that direction would be contested. I did not send the letter immediately. I called my son first. He answered on the second ring, his voice too casual, the way a voice gets when a person has been waiting for a call and is pretending they haven't. "Dad," he said, "you disappeared on us Saturday. We were worried." "I know," I said. "I'd like to have dinner. Just you and me." This week, there was a pause, brief, calculated. "Of course. How's Thursday?" We met at a steakhouse near his office, a place he'd chosen on his expense account in better times. He was already seated when I arrived. He stood to hug me and I let him, because whatever he had become, he had also once been a boy I had taught to ride a bicycle in a parking lot on a Saturday morning, falling and getting up and falling again, with the particular determination of a child who wants to prove something to his father. We ordered. We talked about ordinary things, for the length of time it takes to eat a meal between two people who are each waiting for the other to say something real. Then I set my fork down and I looked at him directly. "I found your emails," I said. "The ones you sent to Gerald Whitmore. Your mother printed them." The color left his face in stages, like water draining. "Dad, I'm not finished," I said, not unkindly. "Your mother also left me a letter. She found them by accident, and she didn't know what to do. She was sick, and she was worried about me. And instead of burdening me, she put the information somewhere she knew I would eventually find it. That was who your mother was." My son was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different, younger somehow, stripped of the performance he'd been giving me for months. "I was scared," he said. "The house is worth a lot. The investments. I kept thinking, what if something happens to you, and there's no plan? What if you make a bad decision, and you wanted to make the decisions for me," I said. He looked at his plate. "I am 67 years old," I told him. "I designed load-bearing structures that are still standing. I read every document I sign. I know my assets down to the last account number. I am not a man who needs to be managed." "I know," he said. And then quietly, "I'm sorry, Dad." I believed that he was. Not fully, there was still in him the particular small hunger that had led him to Gerald Whitmore in the first place, and I was not naive enough to think one dinner would cure it. But remorse, even partial remorse, is something. It's a beginning of something, if you tend it carefully. I told him about the revised estate plan. I told him about James. I told him that the power of attorney now rested with his cousin, and that this was not a punishment but a boundary, and that boundaries were not the opposite of love. I told him that his mother had believed in him. I had read every word of that letter, and there was grief in it but no hatred, and that I thought she was probably still right to believe in him if he chose to deserve it. He nodded. He did not argue. That was something too. We finished dinner. I paid, which surprised him. He offered to drive me home, and I said no. I had my own car. I had driven myself, and I was perfectly capable of driving myself back. On the drive home, I took Route 9, past the Lakeside Conference Center. The lights were off. The parking lot was empty. Whatever seminar was scheduled there next would be for someone else. I got home at 9:30. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and stood at the back door looking out at the yard. The oak tree was dark against the sky. The bird feeder was a small silhouette hanging from its hook. I thought about Margaret at her kitchen table, printing emails she'd found by accident on a laptop, quietly building a record for a contingency she hoped would never come. I thought about the careful love in that love that didn't announce itself, didn't ask to be noticed, just did the necessary thing because it was necessary. I thought about what she had said to me once, years ago, when I asked her how she managed to stay so calm when things went wrong. She'd looked at me with the particular expression she had when she thought a question was slightly beside the point. "I'm not calm," she said. "I'm prepared." I stood there at the back door for a while. Then I went to bed. In the morning, I got up before the light, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table. When the sky began to pale, I went outside with the bag of sunflower seeds. I keep on the porch, and I filled the feeder slowly, carefully. The way you do a thing when you want it done right. The birds came as they always do. Patient, faithful, certain that what they needed would be there. I told Margaret it was a good morning. I tell her that every morning. Some habits aren't about the dead. They're about keeping yourself honest with the living. I still have her letter. I keep it in the top drawer of my desk, in an envelope with her handwriting on the outside. I haven't decided what to do about my son, not entirely. That is still a question I'm living with. The way you live with certain questions, when the answer matters enough to deserve time. What I know is this. I am not a man who can be led anywhere he doesn't choose to go. I know who I am. I know what I've built. And I know what love looks like when it's real. Because I lived with it for 40 years, and it left me careful notes inside a filing cabinet. Just in case.